Hi, in today's interview, I speak with Paul McEvoy of Portland, Maine. Paul builds beautiful jazz guitars. He was kind enough to invite me into his shop in Portland, which was a beautiful small space filled to the brim with tools and workbenches and wood blanks for necks and backs and sides. Just a great space to create in. I really enjoyed my visit with Paul. I learned a lot about the kind of guitars that he is making, and I hope you enjoy this video. Hey, how are you? This is Brian over here at Secret Guitar Club. I'm here today with Paul McEvoy in Portland, Maine, in his great little studio space. Paul, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
So tell me, when did you get interested in guitar, and when did you start building guitars?
Probably a long story like everybody else who does this, but I was interested in music when I was a kid, and I played guitar and bass. I remember I was interested in violin family instruments when I was a kid, maybe more a little bit for making, but I remember the first luthier, maybe the second luthier I ever met, first or second, but this guy Ed Madej, who's still going, very unique, interesting guy in Long Island where I grew up, who kind of has a mind for like an older version of Long Island, not the suburban Long Island, but he grew up on the bay and he's a fisherman, I think, and kind of a just an interesting older soul, I would say. And I had a bass. I used to play bass. That was my instrument, and upright bass. And my teacher was a friend of Ed's, and he said to take the bass to Ed. And so Ed, I think, was more interested in building at that point, but he was kind enough to work on my bass. And he's just, I think for a lot of people who get into this, the first time they walk into a shop, especially if they're a kid, they're just like, what is going on here? And I was interested in hand tools and stuff when I was younger anyway. My parents sort of had a ethic or a sort of an ethos of like do-it-yourself kind of ideals. So I saw Ed, and then I would read books about making violins. And
You were in high school, middle school?
yeah, junior high school. But I was more of a book person, like a reader than a doer at that point. So I read a lot of books about making instruments, but I didn't do a whole lot with it. And then I ended up going to school for music for jazz bass, and it was sort of not an entirely satisfying experience, I guess, for a variety of reasons. Myself, my own issues, and then the school itself or whatever. But when I got out, I was sort of interested in some kind of like a hippie ideal of working with my hands, and I worked in some boat yards, and then I started to try to make a violin. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I made the mold, just the mold for a violin, and I walked into this bass shop in New York City. I lived in Long Island. I took the train into the city, and I just had basically just the outline of the violin, the mold, cut out. And I went to this shop, David Gage, which was at the time and still is an extremely well-known bass shop in New York. And I said, I'm interested in working on instruments. This is what I did, which was basically nothing. And they ended up having me, but I did know how to use some tools, and I did know how to kind of work with my hands. I worked in the boatyard, and I done some little bit of boat building, and anyway, he ended up hiring me. I had to audition for a week. They auditioned 3 people, so I worked for a week, and then I was gone for 3 weeks, and then he said, 3 weeks later, he said, you won the audition or something.
Oh,
The
cool.
other guys must have been very, very not skilled because I was not skilled. So I worked there for a year and a half, and I learned a lot there about working with my hands and being precise. Basically, I was doing just all kinds of repairs on basses, and that shop, I wouldn't necessarily work on the instruments that were like $40,000 or $80,000, but they were these basses, Italian basses from the 1700s that were beautiful, and they would come in and be worked on, and so I would work on the sort of more middle level or lower level stuff, but the quality that I was trying to do was the same as on the expensive stuff, and so I learned a lot there.
Yeah.
And right before September was like 2001, I moved to Boston. Thought that I would maybe start my own bass shop, and just for a variety of reasons, I just decided that was going to be too hard, and I ended up just doing other stuff, and I didn't really touch a tool. I think I wanted to try to build a violin for a little while, and then I didn't touch a tool for maybe 20 years. And
Wow.
I ended up I did a bunch of random jobs, photography for a while, and then ended up going to nursing school, and I've been a nurse for about 15 years. And
Okay.
in 2000, and I lived, it's a long story, but I lived on a sailboat for a while in Baltimore, and I took some big trips on the boat, and then at a certain point I was like, I'm done with that, and I'd like to find something to do that, I don't know, just this is, making instruments has been on my mind since that time I walked in Ed Maday's shop, and I
dove all in.
Sort of, yeah. I in 2019 or 2017, I think I just sold the boat, and I was living at my friend's house. I tried to make a Telecaster guitar, which I had no idea how to do. Just made a mess of a piece of wood with a router. And in 2019, I went to Sergei DeJong's shop in Canada for a 5-week class, and that's when I really learned how to make guitars. And Sergei's class, if a lot of people have heard of Sergei, but he's a famous teacher. He's a famous luthier in Canada, and he's a famous teacher. And he's probably taught, I would say, seemingly like 3/4 of any luthiers in Canada have taken his class. It's very, very well known for Canadians, a little bit less so for Americans. And Sergei's just a really, really interesting guy. Very, like many luthiers, there's not really anybody like him. And I learned a lot. And he's a really good teacher. And I really like Sergei's. I think the thing that Sergei teaches better than anything is just being creative. He's a big experimenter. No two of his guitars are ever alike, and he's done a million different experiments. And so he'll try something; it'll be a great idea. He'll do it for 5 guitars, and then he'll stop doing it and do something else. And so
So that's where you jumped from working on violins and basses, and that's where you jumped into guitars. Was working with Sergei.
Yeah, that's that was. And I'd love to make a violin someday. I think about it because there's certain skills with violins, with carving and stuff that I'd love to be better at, but they're very different. Actually, the guy Ed Maday, he does both, and it's not a ton of people though who do both. They're pretty. Violin making is a pretty hand tool oriented thing. It's hard to automize, and then guitar making is pretty industrial, no matter how you cut it. There's a lot more machine work involved. So
and then where did you delve into your niche on jazz guitars? Was it working with Sergei, or was it something after that you really wanted to focus on jazz guitars? Because that's unique.
Yeah, so the guitars that I make, I'm basically making classical guitars, some electric guitars, and these are, so terminology-wise, we would call these Selmer style. I call these Selmer style guitars. They're the French style guitar that Django Reinhardt would play.
That oval immediately reminds me of Django for some reason.
So the traditional Django guitar, which I don't have one here, is it has a smaller oval hole going this way.
Okay.
So this is sort of my take on it, my design of a bigger hole guitar. So I started playing that music a little bit in Baltimore, where I was living when I had the sailboat, and I bought a cheap Chinese Selmer copy, what they call a petit bouche with a smaller hole, and I guess I just one of those things where I wanted one, and I wanted a better one. I couldn't afford it, so then I spent $80,000 making one. So
that's how it goes.
But they're really interesting instruments. If you make a Martin guitar or kind of a bluegrass guitar, the market is gigantic. There's a million people who want that guitar, and the supply is gigantic too. There's a million people making perfect guitars. With these guitars, the market is quite small. It's probably 7,000 people in the whole United States or something, very small. And then the amount of people who make them is, in the United States is, you can count on, 2 hands probably, so, or less. And I think they're really, these guitars, the Selmer guitars in particular, are very idiosyncratic. There's nothing else like them. So these guitars are ladder braced. But the braces go this way, like a ladder, like you're climbing up a ladder, versus like a our shop guitar is usually X-braced or they're parallel braced. So this is a ladder braced guitar, which is kind of associated with to a degree lesser quality guitars, but the Selmer guitars are very high quality, the originals, and they're just totally a weird guitar. And the interesting thing to me about Selmer guitars is that if Django Reinhardt never played one, you'd never have heard about it. They made about 500, but I think the majority of them were made after Django started playing one. And the demand, and this is my understanding, the demand, was there because of Django. So, and they're pretty obscure as it is, but if Django hadn't gotten into them, then they wouldn't exist. You wouldn't know about them.
Very interesting,
So,
why don't you get that up a little closer to the camera?
Sure. So this is
it's beautiful. You can see all that reflection in there.
Yeah, so So there's flame maple back and it's got full of sawdust, and this is the neck that goes with it. So my guitars have this adjustable neck joint thing, so basically the neck is removable from the guitar. So that's the neck articulates on this kind of hinge.
Gotcha.
And then there's a little screw in there. I can show you.
So that's how you fasten it? Just that one little screw to the neck?
Nope, you don't fasten it at all. Actually, the strings fasten it. So that so the neck is independent of the guitar, but this screw here just changes the action of the guitar.
Gotcha. Oh, that's cool.
So let's see if I can. So if you turn it, you can see the neck angle changes. So you'd think that these guitars would be, quiet, or people I think associate the joint of the neck with some sound production. But my guitars are, everybody who's played one pretty much agrees that they're quite loud.
Yeah.
And so my feeling is the neck joint doesn't really have anything to do with the sound of the guitar. But in this case, the advantages for me are that the neck is sort of independent of the top of the guitar. So when you, on a traditional guitar, the fingerboard is glued to the top of the guitar.
Yeah.
And it kind of sets that the neck and the body are two different surfaces. So there's a lot of issues with the end of the fingerboard where it's, where the frets are not really in line because there's some kind of twisting force here. But with my guitar, the neck is basically one independent body.
Yeah.
And so, and there's some carbon fiber rods in there to keep everything straight. So the notes on the top, on these top strings tend to, I think, ring out a little bit better. But also for travel, I'm still working on some systems for boxing it up. But if you want to get an airplane, this you can put this in a separate case, and then you can put the neck in. And when you get to the destination, you can just put the neck on and put the strings on. So
that's definitely handy.
So yeah. So this is a guitar as sort of a tribute to Jimmy DeQuisto, who was sort of like a hero for me, a guitar maker from New York who worked with John D'Angelico, who was a famous archtop maker.
Sure, yeah.
And Jimmy DeQuisto made the original blue guitar from the Blue Guitar Collection. So
cool.
I always just aesthetically really appreciated his sort of minimalism, and this guitar ended up becoming blue. So
yeah, it looks great.
Yeah, it's a really nice, beautiful piece of wood. This wood was sort of donated to me by a really wonderful older luthier who retired, and he gave me a bunch of wood. So it's pretty extraordinary stuff, this maple. Yeah, and he gave me quite a bit of it. So
yeah. And then did you use like Rubio monocoat to dye it, or what did you use to get the color on there?
That's the Stu Mac transient
yep.
dyes, and then it has this is going to be the Ken Parker, I call it Ken Parker finishing system, which is which is epoxy and then true oil over it. So I'm just starting. So there will have quite a bit more gloss on it, or some gloss, because right now it's pretty dull.
Is this, I saw one in here earlier that was electric, had a pickup on it. Is this going to be acoustic, or will this have a pickup?
I'll show you that. That's another thing. I'm kind of I have a bunch of experiments. It's a balance between experimenting and getting anything done.
Yeah.
But this is the guitar I make. I call it with the traditional Selmer guitars, you have a petite bouche, which is a small sound hole, and they have what they call a D hole or a grand bouche, which is a bigger sound hole. And this is so I just came up with this design, which is not traditional, and I call this the big bouche. It's kind of a joke, but it's it's sort of somewhat the size of a D hole. But my guitars, so the traditional Selmer guitars have a thing called the pliage. At the bridge, the top when they make it is basically heat bent, so they bend the top into a V. So right at the bridge, there's a sharp kind of angle cut, not sharp, but there's an angle sort of bent in, and it gives a little bit more fall off for the tailpiece, so that the strings have a little more tension on them. I never really liked that idea, even though that's traditional. So what I did was make basically a dish that has the height of where the pliage would be, the elevation, but then it's all rounded out. So basically, there's like kind of a strong fall off here and a slower fall off here. So the top is hard to see on the picture, but the top has quite a bit of arch in it.
Oh, I do see that. Yeah.
So it's it does not as much as an arch top, but there's a lot of curve I press into the wood, and then I hold it in there with the braces. So yeah. And these guitars, for whatever reason, are I make a 3-brace design too instead of a 4-brace design. But these guitars are very loud, and that's I don't it's not like I'm bragging, but it's just they tend to be quite loud, and I've had a lot of great players play them, and they really like playing them acoustically. But one guy whose opinion I really respected, it might be hard to amplify because it's so loud. And so I was thinking about a way to, and I also, these guitars traditionally when you play them, if you wanted to amplify them, they have these pickups that kind of clip on, and the wire falls off the top of the guitar to like the wire isn't in the guitar, and I never really liked that look. So to try to combat that, this is something I've come up with, and I'm still working on it. But it's basically just so this the.
Hold that for you.
I got it. The goal is that it is to muffle the sound of the guitar a little bit.
Yeah, like a sound hole cover.
Yeah, a little bit, and then it's got a little bit of air, and then also there's like a pickup in there to play. So you could still put a microphone on there. You could play with the pickup. I may put a piezo pickup in it anyway, but this is brand new. I've never plugged this in. It's brand new as of like 2 days ago. I just made it. So I'm using a 3D print here of the sound hole, which actually is cool because it comes off the. This is infusion, right, so then I printed this 3D print, and then I just put a wood cover over it. So
perfect.
And then this is just some fun tack tape to hold it in. So yeah, that's the electrified version, but it's basically a way to make the guitar less loud because it's so loud as it is. But,
isn't that funny? Make it electric to make it
quiet. Exactly.
And then your headstocks are beautiful. You always do a slot head.
So this is pretty much a traditional Selmer style headstock. That's what they look like, and they're always slotted pretty much, and they're pretty. I don't really make the traditional neck. I use I don't make the neck the way they did traditionally. This is so you can show. There's like a V joint here so there's a V here, and next to the headstock, and then the neck are two separate pieces.
Gotcha.
And
very interesting.
So kind of my modern take on the Selmer guitar. I'm not really locked into making the traditional way because there's plenty of guys who make beautiful Selmer copies, like I say note for note, but cut for cut, they're perfect. And the same as with the Martin guitars. It's like if you decide you're going to make Selmer copies, you're competing against guys who have been doing it really well for forever. So I guess my thought is that I'm trying to make something that's unique and different, and hopefully somebody wants to buy that because I don't like if you want to buy a perfect copy of a 1940 Selmer, there's a guy who's already doing that really well, but this is totally unique. I should say I feel like it's totally unique and plays really well. So it's my take.
I have followed you on Instagram for a little while now, and one of the posts that you made, I guess it was back in the fall or summer, that really caught my attention was David Rawlings came up.
Oh
It was a funny story. You yelled out the window because we're right in the same building that the State Theater is in.
Yeah, it's interesting. So my shop is in the building where the main State Theater is in, which is a pretty big, not arena, but a pretty big event space for Maine, and. I've been here for 3 years, and the tour bus is parked right outside the window. If you can see right out here. I'm on the 5th floor, but the tour bus is parked literally right outside the window here. Yeah. So I've never reached out to anybody before, but what I make is fairly idiosyncratic. There's been maybe one or two people where I was like, oh yeah, I'd love to get that guy to play my guitar.
Yeah.
Pat Metheny came through, and I tried to make a play for that. That didn't happen. But David Rawlings, he's a Americana, whatever you want to call it, American musician. But I knew that he had actually bought it. He's played traditionally an Epiphone archtop, which is pretty idiosyncratic for an Americana musician. Although, Mother Maybelle Carter played Gibson archtop, so it's just the modern things that you play a Martin or a Gibson flat top. But I knew that he had played this Epiphone archtop forever, and then I knew recently that he had. Bought a original D'Angelico archtop, and I can't remember who originally owned it, but it was kind of a historic guitar, and I was like, well, this is a guy who is kind of open-minded to guitars, and my guitar is this guitar in particular is kind of some sort of a splitting the gap between an archtop and a flat top, and a couple other things. And this guitar, the way that I've made it, it does, I think, have a couple chameleon aspects to it, and that it can, you can kind of play bluegrass on this, and it sounds. I don't know if if you had somebody blindfolded and they were listening to it, if they could tell that it wasn't a flat top guitar, but it can also do it can sound do the Django stuff, and it can sound kind of like an archtop also. So I thought maybe he'd like to come up and be fun. So I sent him a note and
oh, cool, nice.
Yeah, so
that's really cool.
Yeah, I wish that I wish there were other people that I was as interested in, but he was a lovely guy, and he sat in the chair and we talked for 45 minutes, so it was pretty great. Yeah,
very cool.
Yeah,
very cool. Well, I appreciate you chatting with me about this. You're making beautiful instruments. These are great guitars. Where can people check them out? I'm on Instagram at Paul McEvoy Guitars, and YouTube I have a bunch of videos of people playing my instruments. Again, at Paul McEvoy Guitars. It's MCEVOY, and awesome. Great. Thanks so much, Paul. Appreciate it.
Yeah.